Hey, IT friends, how's it going? Uh, I had submitted a talk to MSP GeekCon about hiring MSP employees, and for some reason, instead of picking that, they picked my meme topic. So I'll record that presentation as a video at some point. But I wanted to pull out a piece of it. I was recently having a conversation with some of the other executives at Helped, and I've had this conversation before with a bunch of MSP owners. And it really comes down to that dichotomy we have at the typical MSP where we kind of need all of our levels of staff to know a little bit about everything. And we joke about that, right? In this industry, we tell prospective employees it's like drinking from a fire hose. You're never going to learn so much. You won't get stagnant. But the reality of that, in terms of how that affects employee growth and professional development, I think a lot of us don't really know what to do next. We spoke about in a previous video about PD programs and certification programs and why they don't always land with the energy you would expect them to land with, and why some of your staff don't take advantage of them. So, we're going to kind of explore a little bit more on the psychology of that subject and some approaches and things you can look for to sort of help yourself out with some of those MSP employees that are good hires, but they just don't really seem to be in it to win it. We've talked before in other videos about books like Top Grading that break down your team into A, B, and C players. I'm going to kind of use that analogy here, where A players are your superstars. We'd all love everybody in our team to be an A player, but that's not really realistic for a variety of reasons. And the most important one being that if everybody is an A player, then nobody is an A player. And we talked about that in a previous video. So what ends up happening is most organizations are have a solid foundation of good, reliable B players. And our goal as their managers is to try and grow as many of those B players into functional A players as possible, or and hopefully not, but sometimes identify those that really are actually C players and move them in that direction and ultimately out of our organization. And so, with that in mind, and I think that's how many MSPs try to operate, I would say that most of us, not maybe the best managers, but we're pretty good at helping those super driven motivated employees that are just tripping over themselves to become A players. We're all usually pretty good at that because we can throw resources at that. We can buy them tests, we can buy them study sessions, we can put them as apprentices on projects, we can give them gear to play with. Like, there's so many ways you can just throw basically fuel on that fire, and that fire will just combust the fuel with or without any additional management effort. And then I think we are all also, in our own ways, generally capable of sussing out the people that really are C players in disguise. Some of us take a little bit longer than we should. And usually, if you have some sort of KPIs or metrics or some basic standard you're holding your staff to, those folks exit the organization eventually, whether we drive them out or they drive themselves out. And I'll make a video at some point on more effective strategies to do that and not make your team suffer. But for the time being, what I really want to talk about are those B players that, like, they're good B players, but they just, there's no lights on behind their eyes, and they're not really doing much to move forward. They're the people we talked about in the last video that tell you they want to earn a certification, may eventually do it over a course of a few years, but never really seem to be motivated. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the type of person I'm talking about, and this is why this is important. There's a weird thing in employee culture that a lot of entrepreneurs who have not been employees in a small business because either they've only ever worked for themselves or because they came from a much larger organization don't realize is there are certain, this is sort of a unwritten and honestly mostly bullshit employee bill of rights that a lot of employees the world over have created for themselves and are holding you accountable to, whether you ever agreed to be held accountable to it. And a lot of it is more parenting than employer and managing, whatever. But where I'm going with this is a lot of the B players we're talking about will do this weird thing where they'll take very little agency in their own career progression. They're not against moving forward. It's not fighting you. They'll take very little agency in moving forward themselves, but they will sort of subtly hold you accountable for not delivering them the end goal that they've never clearly articulated they wanted or really made much of a tangible effort to move towards on their own. In effect, they are sort of career couch potatoes. They are sitting there and are sort of expecting you to bring them to the results they desire. But yet they're not really doing a whole lot to move themselves there. And this varies employee to employee. Some employees, this is very subtle and could take years to get to this point. Other employees will get there a little bit quicker. And it may not always necessarily be like negative or caustic, but it's usually not positive. And it usually will end up resulting in somebody fully checking out and just showing up to collect their paycheck. Or in the conditions I think most of us want to avoid, it will eventually cause this person to transition out of the organization with some sort of a negative feeling that you never did anything to progress their career forward. So I think it's a good place to stop and ask, as an MSP owner, how many times have you heard that feedback from your employees that have left? I assume a lot of you, because most of you MSP owners are not terrible people, despite what Reddit would indicate. Mostly probably make an effort to treat your employees kindly and probably, especially in a small business, make some sort of an effort to, politely stay in touch. So there's a good chance you're performing something that would amount to an exit interview, even if it isn't formally that. And how often are you hearing the feedback that I didn't really see a career path here, or there wasn't really a clear indication of what my career progression would be, or I left for more money? And we're sitting there and we're like, for more money, but it wasn't. You picked up a long commute. You have a worse job. Like, they've given you less freedom. You're actually netting less money. That makes no sense. How many of you have ever had somebody exit your organization for what basically boiled down to, I didn't know what my next career step would be here. I felt like I had no future. But then where they went, you're scratching your head because you're like, well, you certainly didn't get a future over there. I know that happened to me a lot. And I suspect it's happened to a lot of you. These are the people I'm talking about. And when this conversation happens, for the most part, I think we tend to be somewhere on the scale of surprise, whether from completely shocked because we thought they were pretty happy to mildly surprised that it happened when it happened. Because in most cases, there's a whole bunch of other shit we could unpack about employee reviews, talking to your employees, yada yada. But in general, we tend to regard these people as they are decent employees. They get the job done. They don't complain a lot. They didn't tell us anything was wrong. They didn't tell us they wanted something more until suddenly they need something more. And then we're surprised by it, can't immediately deliver it. It comes off like an ultimatum and all of this happens. So does that ring through for anybody? Have you ever had somebody like that working for you? So what I learned over time is a very easy way to identify these employees from your much less on a disc profile D-driven A players is there's really just one common factor you need to look for. And I've summed it up to, if they don't tinker, they're not a thinker. And what I mean by that is, commonly in the MSP space, if an employee, whether or not an employee asserts their desires, career desires, path, pay scale, dreams, hopes, and wants, a lot of them don't. There's a lot of reasons for that. Whether they assert it or not, if they aren't tinkering, home labbing, experimenting at work, kind of quietly volunteering or shadow apprenticing what other people are doing, if there's none of that happening at all, they are never, ever going to be upgradable to an A player. Now, you may say I have an example of one or two people I've put a ton of time and effort into, because I have examples of people like that I did take from a they don't tinker and turn them into like a functioning A player. But you have to go back and think about the amount of time and effort that you dedicated to it. And it's not feasible, scalable, or tenable. So don't count the exceptions. Generally speaking, if they don't have that desire to tinker, they don't have the internal passion or motivation, one or the other, or both, to move up. And so they probably won't. And it's important that you identify that, because that doesn't mean that they aren't going to expect that you still provide them the trappings of having moved up. And they will get to a point, if they are not receiving the compensation or feeling of career progression forward, that they will leave. And you may be saying to me, well, that's fine. They're not willing to put in that effort. I don't want them. Except a lot of these people are those people that we kind of just rely on to get the job done quietly. And so when they leave, it hurts. When an A player leaves, yeah, it's crappy, but we all recognize that like it is a job they're performing, and we can have somebody else fill the job, and the A player is very expensive. So usually when an A player leaves, it is less expensive and doable to fill their role with someone that can get the job done. And of course, when a C player leaves, thank God, right? I'm glad to have them out of our organization. They were driving the place down. But when these quiet B players that show up, get their job done, and leave go away, that takes a little while to replace. Yes, you can find somebody off the shelf that can do the work, but to find somebody that can do the work doesn't take a lot of your mental and emotional time and hand-holding. You kind of miss them. So these aren't people that you want to just sort of surprise exit the organization. You really want to be able to plan around either retaining them and playing to what their strengths are, or making a plan to not be surprised when they exit the organization. And that's why I suggest you really start looking into more of how much these people tinker. This is going to vary person to person. But some common things you can look for, and a lot of this stuff was stuff I put in my my interviewing candidates thing. One of my favorite ones to ask is early on, do you have a passion for technology? You're going to get lies to this, but just to see what they say and dig into what their answer is. And you can tell pretty quickly if somebody is unknowledgeable but passionate about a subject, or if they're just saying they are. And it doesn't have to be, and this, to be clear, this doesn't have to be about computers. That's the easy one. So if somebody says, yes, I'm passionate about computers, did you build the computer that you're currently talking to me on? You did. What did you choose? See if they put in any level of excitement or thought process to explaining it. Did they use PC Part Picker? Did they copy their favorite streamer? Did they just go on Newegg and wing it? Did they buy an old computer off eBay and slowly whatever? Like, but was there something there? Was there some sort of light behind their eyes there? That's the easy one. But some people aren't going to build a computer. So you got to pull on that thread a little bit and look for elements that indicate to you that they like to tool around and fool around with some element of technology in their spare time outside of work. Do they have a 3D printer? All right. Is the 3D printer totally stock, and are they just using completely stock STL files off the internet? Like me, I don't like to tinker with 3D printing. I have a 3D printer. I print stuff, but only if someone else has done all the work for me and I can plug it in and just hit the button. So that's probably not a good example of my idea that, my passion for tinkering. Have they gone in and done anything with home automation? Have they done anything interesting with if that, then this in their Alexa or Google or something else? Do they have a video doorbell set up? Have they tweaked the set? Like literally anything. But you want to dig into that a little bit. And once you find the grain or the kernel of some tinkering there, it becomes your job as a manager to pull on that and nurture that into a little tinkering seedling that becomes applied to work. And so when they come to you and they say, I want a job, my passion is, my desired career path is cybersecurity. That's what I hear all the time now is I want a career in cybersecurity, which is when I groan and roll my eyes because it was, what does that even mean anymore? But fair. Or I want to be a network administrator, or I want to be a hardware technician, whatever they tell you. You need to figure out a way based on now having pulled out before that they have some capacity on their own to tinker, to connect those two. And if they will not start tinkering somehow off the clock on something that they find interesting, does not have to be related to work, that is connected back to their work goal, it ain't going to happen otherwise. So if somebody comes to you, I just had this conversation today. If somebody comes to you and they say, I'm interested in a career as a networking professional. Okay, cool. So what I challenged this person to was at home, you have some sort of a network, right? It could be an ISP provided device. You might have a Unify. My Unify is missing. You might have a Unify system. That's weird. And you're whatever, like whatever you have you gone in and changed how DNS works and specified your own DNS server? It's for any of us that know, that's a pretty simple thing to do on a lot of equipment. It may not be a simple thing to enable in your environment, depending on the type of equipment you have in the setup. So you challenge them with a little mini project like that. And what you're looking for is to see if there's the tiniest flicker of a candlelight in the back of their eyes that goes, oh, I'm going to go home and try that. And what you're looking for is the next day, next week, they come back and tell you, yeah, hey, I updated, all my DNS to point to Cloudflare, or I broke everything and I had to panic call my ISP. Either event is good. You just want to know if they went back on their own and tried something out that they expressed an interest in, whether it worked well or not. We're not testing for, do they have the intellectual capacity or experience to do it right? We just want to see if there's a little bit of passion to tinker. If there is, you can work with that. You can nurture that. It's going to take time for some people, but you can nurture that and you can push these people eventually over time through a career plan that will bring them around to be an A player. But if they don't, well, here's the thing. Like if you're not motivated at all about something on your personal time, you're not magically going to become motivated about moving your career forward towards that thing, even if you have career defining events happen. And I think that's where a lot of us get into trouble. So what I mean by career defining event is when somebody suddenly has a major change in their life that requires them to suddenly take their career slightly more seriously. This could be a family change. Maybe they're adding a family, maybe they're having a kid, maybe, they are moving, maybe they're, something like that. It could be a housing situation where they're buying a house or they're changing where they're renting. Could be that they need a new car, whatever it is, it's an external factor that suddenly causes someone to go, oh shit, I need to worry about how much I'm making and where I'm going with my career. This can be a moment that your average B player will not really see coming until it happens. Hi, I've been that person. And then suddenly their problem is your problem. And of course, they want a quick solution to this, because remember what we said before, that just because they've had no agency in affecting anything that would progress them towards this does not mean that they have any less desire to arrive at the outcome. And if you don't believe me that people think that way, have you heard of the weight loss industry? So they have an event like this and they come to you and they basically tell you about this event, and the bold ones will tell you they need to make more. The less bold ones will hope that you'll just extrapolate that information. But either way, if you don't, with a relative sense of make the changes commensurate to help them overcome this challenge, they're going to hold you accountable for that. They're not going to hold them accountable for that. They're going to hold you accountable for that. If you've already identified the ones who tinker, and you've started them on a path, could be a very slow path, to moving forward with experimentation and improvement, you have this amazing tool you can use to frame that conversation around. Yeah, career development plans and all of that are better, but I think for a lot of the people who are going to be watching this video, you're not at that point yet in both your management capacity and your operational sophistication to really, reliably and repeatedly have a defined career development plan process. So this is more of a stopgap measure. Those employees that who like to tinker and are working on tinkering, you frame it back to that. Hey, you told me 3 months ago you wanted to be a security guy. I challenge you to go back home to your home network and figure out a way to secure all of your IoT devices from the computer you're remote into work with. Did you ever do that? And the value in having this sort of approach is if they say, no, I didn't do that. Well, okay, then That's a fundamental skill. There's a lot of ways to do it. That's a fundamental skill to being a security guy. And now you're asking me to pay you more to be that person, but you've had 3 months to, on your own, with your own stuff, experiment, and you've done nothing. That's not going to change, folks. That person just identified themselves as a C player. Now, on the other hand, if they say, yeah, whether they got it to work or not, yeah, I did. I tried this, and I tried this. And you're sitting there and you're like, that's not right. That's the wrong way to do it. Whatever. Or that is right, perfect, and great. Now you have something you can talk about. You can level set with them. You can say, that's awesome. That's exactly the first steps you would take on this career. I really like that you did this, this, and this. In fact, if you're comfortable, maybe they segregated it on a VLAN. If you're comfortable with that, I could start having you work on some of our more basic networking projects to fast track you to getting to that dollar amount that you just told me you need to earn a lot quicker than we would normally, because you've told me you can do it at home. You did do it at home, so I'll let you try it here. Alternatively, if they come to you and they say, well, I tried some stuff, but it didn't work. I couldn't get it to work right. It was still happening. Hey, no problem. That's awesome that you tried those things. I love that. I'll get you in a training program, but your skill set really isn't in a place yet where I can start paying you to execute on that job that you just admitted to me you can't even execute on in a home environment. So how about instead, let's put you on a plan where you're going to learn these skills. You're going to start getting assigned to, some training time. You're going to go earn this certification. You're going to put in a little work for me. But at the end of that tunnel, it's a little bit of a longer tunnel, there's going to be a light in that I will get you to that number that you're thinking of. And we'll start working to build out a career plan for you to actually be the security guy here. Either way, it gives you something tangible to talk about. And then it allows the employee to agree or disagree. And I think that's a really important part, because that allows an employee to self-identify that they're not fit for the role under your expectations at your company. And it allows them to self-identify that an easier path, the weight loss pill here, is to simply go somewhere else. And if they come to that conclusion on their own in a situation that is objectively fair, it's far more likely that you can maintain a positive relationship. You have the tools available to you as an employer to say, hey, it sounds like we're not the best fit for your career objectives. Let me go help you find that job. Let me be a reference for you. Let me set you on the right path, which means that employee is probably going to say more positive things about your company when they're out in the wider world. And there's a possibility later, if they learn those skills in someone else's dime, that they'll be interested in reconnecting with you. You lose all of those bargaining chips if you just sort of let this happen and play out quietly and get surprised with the, hi, I'm leaving to go get more money and pick up an hour commute both ways for what I think is an increase in title that we all know is not that at all. And ultimately, at that size, at this SMB size we're talking about, this really is important. So I'll close this up by just pointing out a little bit of to why this is important. Because normally we advocate that it's important for the employee to not burn bridges and to sort of, in a certain way, show some deference and respect to their employer, even if they're leaving, because it's a small industry and you never know who knows who. And I think for the most part, because the perception is that employers have traditionally in the history of employment had most of the power and control. That's where that logic comes from. It's not wrong, but flip-flop that around. Employees have a lot more power now than they've had in really even until 20 years ago. The internet has been a great level setter for allowing employees to basically be de facto net promoters of not only what it's like working for you, but how you actually work. And it's entirely possible that an employee can start off in a relatively small unknown company and then end up later in their career in a pretty influential spot in the industry. And so I would argue, especially for that smaller MSP, you might want to be, as the MSP owner, just as careful about not torching those bridges with employees that are leaving you, even if they're not a good fit, as we would all recommend those employees be of not burning the bridge with you. Because you never really know who's going to end up being where and what's going to happen. And I'll give you a great example. When I switched over from being an MSP to a vendor, well, suddenly every single person that ever worked for me was potentially an advocate to help me get whatever I'm vending into that business. And you may be saying, well, I'm not a vendor, Dean. Well, if you're an MSP, yes, you are. You are a vendor. And so there's that every employee that leaves you, if they, especially if they go to a private business, is a potential advocate, a referral network, somebody that could be telling other people how great you actually are and why they should spend with you. So don't forget that. But they're also a soft element that can dramatically influence who's actually going to end up applying for you. These are the people who leave reviews on Glassdoor and other sites like this. These are the people who go into Reddit and our anti work and say, hey, my last boss actually wasn't all of these terrible things. And a small percentage of people will say, who was it? I'm looking for a job. So you don't really want to just toss away the power that even an employee who's leaving your organization could have at influencing the culture and care of what happens next. So it's important to identify these B players. It's important to identify if they like to tinker at all. It's important to take that passion for tinkering, even if it's a tiny flickering candle flame, and nurture it, because you can nurture that. If the flame is lit, you can nurture it. You probably aren't going to be able to light the flame on your own if it's not lit. You in rare situations, as I said, you may be able to, but the amount of time and effort you're going to have to put into that probably isn't worth it. And just knowing that ahead of time will help you plan better. It'll help you direct your management efforts and resources. It'll cause you to be a little less surprised when somebody like this comes back later with a life-changing event and suddenly expects it to be your problem. And if they do end up exiting the company, there is a way better opportunity for you to make that a positive experience for everybody, where they basically, remain a net promoter of, if not the company, of you as their manager. And you really don't want to discount the power of that in this day of such an interconnected world. So, MSP friends, go back, analyze your staff, identify those B players that aren't really necessarily sticking their necks out or raising their hands right now, but you think could have some potential, and find out if they like to tinker. Because remember, if they like to tinker, they're a thinker. Have a great Tuesday. I didn't have a closing line, sorry. Just have a great Tuesday.